Life Audio.
Welcome back to the TMS podcast, where we share how grace, commitment, and cooperation can help couples live the everyday moments of marriage together.
Hi, everyone. We're Ted and Ashley Slater. Did you recite traditional vows at your wedding? We did.
Sure did.
One thing we promised was in sickness and in health. But what does it look like to walk together as a team through sickness? Best-selling author John Seidl and his wife Brett, who is an award-winning interior designer, join us to talk about how they have been navigating debilitating health issues. It's part 2 of our interview with them. In the last episode, we talked with John and Brett Seidl about navigating mental health issues as a team. Today, we have the second half of our interview with them, and we're discussing how to navigate physical sickness as a team. So we introduced them last time, but in case you missed that episode, here's a bit about John and Brett.
John, as you may remember, is the best-selling author of Finding Rest, A Survivor's Guide to Navigating the Valleys of Anxiety, Faith, and Life. John has helped lead organizations such as I Am Second and Kirk Cameron's digital platform. He also consults with businesses, nonprofits, and content creators on digital media, but writing and storytelling is what he really loves to do.
And Brett is the owner and principal designer at the award-winning interior residential design company Lewis & Rose Interiors in Texas. But if, like us, you don't live in Texas, you can still enjoy seeing her designs on her YouTube channel. Let me try that again. That was kind of a tongue twister. Anyway, yes. I'll include a link to it in the show notes. So as we were talking to John and Brett, they shared how Brett has faced some debilitating health issues that have led, this in last year, that have led to around 25 tests and procedures, 1 major surgery, and dozens of medications. So they share with us about that difficult journey. We also continue to talk about a few things we discussed in the last episode on mental health. You'll hear what John would say if he were sitting across the table from a couple facing mental health issues, what forgiveness looks like in their relationship. So after this short break, we're going to jump back into that interview and just hear the wisdom they have to offer.
Sounds good.
Okay, so if the two of you were sitting across the table from a couple whose marriage is affected by similar things, anxiety, OCD, what would you say to them? How would you encourage them?
And so I think from a sufferer perspective, I think, there's a couple things as well. I think first of all is don't be ashamed to name it, right? And to understand, kind of going back to what I said at the beginning, that once you name it, you do gain a power over it, right? That doesn't mean, it's going to go away necessarily. This is still a journey for me. I still struggle, but I'm loads better than I was during the Splenda incident. I can tell you that, right? So I would say don't be afraid to name it. The second thing is, don't be afraid to treat it in ways that maybe growing up you were told not to treat it, right? I mean, medications has been a huge thing for me. And I think especially in the Christian community, it's been frowned upon. It's getting better. But I kind of tell people, isn't one of the most blatant acts of pride to say, God, you can heal me in any way but this, right? Like when God's like, listen, I have this little pill that can really help your brain fire better, And so I kind of grew up in a tradition that looked down and frowned upon that. And I'm not trying to tell everyone they should get on medication, right? I'm just saying, don't write it off, right? And don't write other ways off, right? I mean, listen, I turned into a half marathon runner, right? After my diagnosis. I think I've done 4 of them. And I was supposed to do a full marathon last month. That did not happen, okay? It was a little too cold to train. But, one of the ways that the Lord might be trying to help you is saying, get off the couch, right? Change your eating habits, right? And I think finally is just understanding, what I call a proper theology of suffering. Is I think a lot of us who struggle will come to some point and say, why me? Right? And God, why do I have to go through this? And I'm not going to pretend that there's a 100% perfect answer, but I can give you the answer that's in the Bible, right? And the answer that's in the Bible is that the Lord allows these things for our good and his glory, right? And I think what we don't like to hear is that pain and suffering have a way of refining us and bringing us closer to Jesus than anything, right? I'm a big C.S. Lewis fan. And, he calls pain the megaphone that God uses to rouse a deaf world. And the truth is that you and I are hard of hearing. And, while it's not fun, the truth is that these struggles do give us more of God. And it's this weird upside down way that it is in the kingdom of God, but it just is, right? And so know that it's not for lack of faith. It's not that you haven't prayed enough. You haven't given enough money to this, ministry or whatnot. It's just that God allows these issues, right? And we do live in a broken world. And so, there's another quote that's attributed to Lewis that says, God has basically allowed these things, not that you'd go through them without pain, but that you would go through them without stain, right? And so I think I've gotten to a point where I thank God for my mental health diagnosis, right? And it has refined and sanctified me in a way that I could never imagine. And just know, though, that it is an ongoing battle, at least for me, right? And I know there are some people who may be miraculously healed, and that's great, and I love that for them. That's not happened for me, right? I'm better for sure, but this is an ongoing battle, and that's okay. Paul had a thorn in his flesh. I have a thorn in my flesh, right? Mm. And I thank God, and I boast in my weakness, just like Paul.
Mm. Well, and hey, Ash, is it okay if I'm sorry, go ahead. I was going to ask a question, but after you go ahead.
Oh, that's okay. Well, I was just going to kind of piggyback on what John was just saying with talking about Paul and the thorn in his flesh. And I think part of that story that people forget too is he cried out to God, please take this thorn out, but also use me despite. But if you want to take it out at any point, that's great. And so I think, remembering and telling couples going through this, it's not only okay, but it is healthy and good and biblical to lament what you are going through. The Lord can handle it and wants to hear that from you. And I think the laments that John and I have gone through, both personally and together, by just being honest about the situation that we're in and bringing that before God, that alone, has brought us closer together. It has brought us individually closer to Christ. So just the power of lament has been pivotal for us.
That's so good. Ted, you had something you wanted to ask?
I did. I found this discussion really insightful and helpful for me personally. Through the trials, through the suffering, there's an eagerness to extend grace, to give the benefit of the doubt. Now, I've had splendid moments. Yep.
I'm not the only one.
And for me, I was so humiliated and embarrassed. There was no way to talk myself out of it. For me, I had to just humble myself, ask forgiveness. And so I was wondering, in your relationship, what does it look like to ask forgiveness and to receive forgiveness?
Well, it's definitely something we've had to practice. Right. And I would say, Brett brought up the term gaslighting earlier. And I think early on in the marriage, to your point, Ted, it's funny. I think, especially when you have one of those thought cycles or those splendid moments, this is bat, what crazy, right? You're like, why can't I just get over this already? You know what I mean? You're like, I wish I could stop, right? I know something's going on here, and it's almost like sometimes it takes over. And so there's two things that you can do with that. You can turn that into shame, which then you try to gaslight the other person maybe to make yourself feel better, which is what I think I would do early on. Or you can turn that into genuine remorse, right? Where you say, listen, I messed up there. I'm sorry. And I would say we've gotten a lot better at that, especially, I think even just over the last few years, especially in the last year of just, you know what, I'm sorry. Even this morning, we were getting ready to get on a different call, and Brett said something to me, I'd made some egg salad, and I thought she was pretty abrupt about telling me to get away with that raunchy egg salad smell. And I'm like, I'm trying to help you get on your call here. You can't figure it out. And yes, I had some egg salad, but then she's like, listen, she came back in 5 minutes. She's like, listen, I'm sorry. I can see how that maybe, seemed a little aggressive. I know you're trying to help me. It was just really kind of accosting to my senses. Okay, get it, right? I mean, I can tell you, by the way, especially before I was untreated or undiagnosed, that little interaction probably would have been a 2 to 3 day event.
Mm-hmm.
And now it's like, okay.
Yeah. And a lot of that, it comes down to the communication, and that, with John, just what he said, it's his acknowledgement and understanding, hey, this was illogical. I'm sorry. And going more to the remorse rather than the shame. But also for me, something that I have had to work on actively, because I am the type, I'm like, you did that. Like, I want to stick it to him, and I have had to really work on the empathy portion. I've had a lot of people ask me over the years, like, or kind of put it in a way of like, would you pray to have this taken away? Or man, you've got it really bad, Brett. And in the past couple of years, it's really been a shift because of working on the empathy. And it's like, well, maybe that's the wrong comment. Because really, it's like, who does have it bad? I don't suffer from anxiety and OCD. I don't have a mental disorder that tells me that my actions and words are illogical, but I can't control them. To me, that would be paralyzing and terrifying. And so by learning to have empathy for what he is mentally going through and this internal struggle that I know that he is going through, he knows this isn't logical and he doesn't want to feel this way and he doesn't want to react this way, but working through that because his body is forcing him to react that way. So having that empathy, learning that empathy, and by extension, giving way more grace than I used to give has been what I have had to work on. And I think I think I've gotten a lot better at it, but it's one of those, it's an ongoing thing. I have to actively remind myself to be empathetic about what he is going through.
I love that. Yeah. And I love how you guys are using, you're vulnerable and open with your story, which I love, because I think that encourages people. I think people hear, I know when I am vulnerable with things we've gone through, that's when people come to me and it's like they start telling me their life story, and you guys have probably had that too, where they go, oh, I can relate to that. So you guys have actually been going through some health challenges in the last year. If you feel comfortable sharing about that, I'd love to hear about that and what you're continuing to learn about, the theology of suffering, as you talked about, and how God is just making himself known, even in a deeper level through that.
Oh, yeah. In fact, we just got off a call right before this that was kind of it was about those health challenges and learning some things. And I think we're probably still processing it even on this call. But yeah, so about a year ago, Brett got in a car accident and it just kind of started this domino effect of health challenges. And I'll give the short version, Brett. I'll let you give as many details as you want. But it started this cascading domino effect of health challenges that really kind of culminated right around Thanksgiving, where there was an incident. Brett fell and we had to take her to the ER and get a CAT scan. Doesn't really remember even much from the incident. And we just got to the point where we're like, okay, this is ridiculous, right? And there's just extreme pain, especially abdominal pain. And no one could figure it out, right? All the tests were coming back normal, quote unquote. GI specialists were saying there's nothing wrong. Your blood tests are fine. Just everything, right? But when, she's passing out and hitting her head and stuff, you're like, well, but something's not right, And so that started this trip to find a specialist that could really help us figure this out. And so we ended up at Mayo Clinic, the best of the best, especially when it comes to GI issues. And over the last month, we've spent a total of about 14 days 14 to 16, really, when you travel and all that stuff, to try to figure out and pinpoint what's going on. And we think we have answers. We literally just got off a call of kind of getting a final diagnosis, and we're just processing that. We're like, okay, I think, yeah, that makes sense. Okay. Yeah. Okay. Now what? This. But man, that's been a test of faith and trust, because, especially when you come down with a disease that's kind of, that's chronic now, and there's a lot of things you wanted to do, and there's a lot of things that you had planned for the year, and now you're not able to do those. Brett was talking about laments. It's like there's some lament, there on my part, and there's, you 10x that with Brett, who's actually going through it. And so I think I'll leave it there, and then Brett, I'll let you fill in the details of kind of exactly how you want to share what's going on.
Yeah, I mean, I think you put it pretty succinctly. It was so the diagnosis that we had were traumatic brain injury, some spinal cord issues, and that just spiraled into a host of gastrointestinal issues and nerve damage issues. And over the past year, I mean, right before this car accident happened, I was a triathlete, peak health. I mean, that's what everyone was like. I've never seen such a healthy 35-year-old. And then a couple months later, where John is literally picking me up off of the floor and bringing me to the ER, putting me in a bathtub because I am screaming and crying in pain. And just so many things that were happening to me were kind of loss of dignity type stuff with medical issues. And for the first time, we'll be celebrating our 15-year anniversary in May.
Oh, congratulations.
Thanks. Like, it's been a good long 15 years. But for the first time, it was really interesting because, we have done so much premarital counseling to other couples in the past. And something we would always tell them is there will come a point in your marriage where you will, and probably more than one, but a very at least definitive one, where you will have to live out your vows. And it's funny because every time we've said that, it's always been before more so in the realm of like, we were dealing with John and his anxiety and OCD and some trauma and financial stuff or whatever. But for me, this was the first time where in sickness and in health really came into play, where I had to put down the hat of like being the quote unquote strong one and fully and utterly lean on John to take care of me in every way you can imagine with gastrointestinal problems, and really rely on him as my partner. And it's been humbling, but I think even the culmination of him coming up with me to the Mayo Clinic and the things that he held my hand through, just horrible procedures, invasive procedures, and he was never shaming and was just such a support. I think that is one of the things through his anxiety, through this medical stuff with me that is so life-giving isn't it just like God to take something so ugly and dark and hard and use it to his glory and for our good. And in this case, my and John's marriage has been so strengthened by these medical issues because we have had to lean on each other so much, and we've never had to do it in this way before.
And I think the irony that Brett has caught herself saying a lot is like, and again, just like God, she's like, you're not worried about that? Or you're not worried about this? You're not anxious about X? You're not anxious about Y? And I'm like, I can't explain it, but I'm not. And she's like, I never thought in this marriage I'd be the anxious one and you'd be the one that's not. And I'm like, only God.
Mm-hmm.
Only God.
Yeah. And I think, do you find that like when we have gone through difficult things, I know we have always come back to this idea that God is good and faithful. He doesn't change no matter what we're going through. And just knowing his character has been something that has helped us walk through those, why is this going on type questions.
Yeah. John, you're probably going to say the same phrase. Yeah.
I don't know. We'll see. I was going to say that there's a line in my book that I talk about, which is we have to get to the point, and this is part of how I define a proper theology of suffering, which is you got to get to the point where you don't judge God by your circumstances, but you judge your circumstances by who you know God is, right? And so Brett going through this, me going through my anxiety, my OCD, and those kind of things, and Brett going through this don't define God, right? God speaks into and defines these circumstances for us. Brett, was that what you were going to say?
It is what I was going to say.
Yes! we would have.
15 years. Yeah.
The game, where you hold up the sign and see if you wrote down the same thing. We just would have
nailed it. That's awesome. I think I actually underlined that line in the book when I was reading it because I was like, ooh, that's good. It's a good way to phrase it. So I feel like we could just keep talking, but we probably need to start wrapping this up. But can you tell us, tell people listening how they can pray for you and how they can find you and connect with you online and about your book?
Yeah. So I think first, just pray for us as we got kind of a diagnosis and treatment plan today, literally, 30 minutes before this call started. And we're just kind of processing what that's going to look like, what we need to do there. And so I think if people would just pray for peace and confidence there, in some ways it's a lot of what we wanted to hear. In some ways it's not. And so we're to that point, like when we talk about not judging God by our circumstances and like we're right there with you folks. And so I think the prayer there would just be that we would just be at peace, right? And that we would be able to face these challenges as a unit and trusting the Lord. And so if you're looking for more on us, especially on my writing, you can go to, I've actually moved a lot of my writing now to my own Substack, which I have loved. And so if you want more information on my writing and how to find my book, and you can go to readdearjohn.com, and you can misspell it or you can spell it correctly. Technically, I go by Jon, but if you say and type in Read Dear John, John, it'll still take you there. It's perfect. That's why you got to buy the misspellings of your name as a domain. So readdearjohn.com. And if you are in the Dallas-Fort Worth area or even all over the country, my wife is a very talented interior designer, and she goes all over the country and does that. So you can go to lewisandroseinteriors.com to find out more about her and her work.
And you actually have videos, right, Brett? You have videos with different decorating.
Yes, we have a YouTube as well. That's at Lewis and Rose.
Nice. Well, it was, I don't know. I just want to say it was a joy to have you guys on. And as I've said, I just really appreciate your honesty and your openness and your vulnerability and just your whole theology of suffering, because I think so many people want to gloss over it. They don't want to really feel it and explore it and trust God through it. So I definitely think he is using you both for his glory. So thank you so much for being on the podcast.
Well, we appreciate it. I actually love the fact that you invited us both on. This is, I think, the second podcast we were able to do together. And I think Brett's a lot better at it than she thinks she is. And so
I know, I would tell him, like, you're the writer, you're the eloquent one.
so thanks for having us both on. I really appreciate
it. Thank you.
All right. So, Ted, I really loved what John had to say about the theology of suffering and what Brett shared about lament. That we can believe that God is good and faithful. We can know his character, yet we can still grieve loss and difficulty. That going through hard things does not change God's character, but that doesn't mean we have to stifle our feelings and the emotions that we're experiencing.
Absolutely. That was really insightful.
Yeah. And since this interview, John and Brett have shared more about Brett's medical journey and the diagnosis they've received. So check out John's Substack, Dear John, for more details. I'll be sure to include a link in the show notes on my website, ashleyslater.com. But before we close, Ted, what's this week's S-Time Challenge?
Well, how about we tie it into the question that I asked about forgiveness?
That sounds good.
So what does forgiveness look like in your marriage? Like on the small things, messing up a dinner order, to the big things where you explode and you humiliate yourself and you have to, the only way forward is a humble apology and seeking forgiveness and reconciliation. Yeah, it's thinking about forgiveness and how you practice it, I think is huge. So that, I think that would be a great challenge.
Good. All right. Well, if you're listening, go and do that this week. Thanks for joining us on the Team Us podcast. We're looking forward to next time as we keep talking about how grace, commitment, and cooperation can help couples live the everyday moments of marriage together.
Team Us with Ted and Ashley Slater is a production of Life Audio and Salem Media. If you liked what you heard today, please take a second to rate and review the podcast in your favorite podcast app so that more listeners like you can find the show. For more faith-filled, inspirational podcasts, visit us at lifeaudio.com.